All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're in the last session. I can't see anything now with these lights, actually. But I have a little bit of time to work while we get the microphones set up. Just to say a few words, we've got three organizations here that, from an innovation perspective, are innovating at the front line. So these organizations are serving our citizens, they're protecting our citizens, and caring for our citizens. So I think it's an interesting environment in which to innovate, because there's probably, there's probably not that much room for trialing things in some of these very difficult situations. So we're going to hear a little bit of interesting things around that, I think. The title of the session just struck me about unlocking innovation, and then the leadership perspective. And that idea of unlocking innovation, it's clear to me that inherent in public sector organizations, we have the capability to innovate. And from a perspective of Microsoft, we've seen that during COVID. So very much in the health sector, we've seen the adoption of technology and the use of data right across the COVID pathway, from track and trace, laboratory results, through to care of patients. And actually one of the leading uses of technology and data that I've seen internationally. So we can step up and we can lead in these areas in an Irish context. Similarly, we've seen education pivoting very quickly and very effectively to continue to engage students. And we've also seen things like the delivery of payments through the Department of Social Protection without the infrastructure of offices at a regional level, so purely using technology and digital platforms. So that ability to innovate is there. It's inherent in the capability of organizations in the public sector. So how do we unlock it? And I think then to look at that, we want to hear a little bit about what the leadership perspective is on that. And we've got three key leaders here today to talk about their experience in leading innovation and probably referring to things in recent years in particular. And our first speaker is Major General Adrian of Murchú. And Adrian is Chief of Staff at Óglaigh na hÉireann, responsible for personnel, logistics, infrastructure, finance, legal, medical, and other combat service support functions for activities here and overseas. So a pretty broad remit, but he also has the remit as a staff lead for corporate governance and innovation. I had a look. The resumes here could take me some time. People have so much experience, we could be here a while. But 40 years in service, and has done tours across Lebanon, Somalia, Western Sahara, Israel, Syria, Ivory Coast, and some time in the EU. So if you think about the kind of learnings, I think, about innovations across those areas, some of that I'm sure will be brought to bear. Also recently has studied at Smurfit Business School with the Executive Diploma in Strategy and Innovation. So Adrian, over to you. Thank you. Thanks very much. And could we have applause for Adrian, please?
I hate to start with a correction, but actually I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff, Frank, because if I let you away with that, the Chief of Staff will probably give me my ticket tomorrow when I get back. So thanks very much. Before I begin, the yellow box there is our vision statement in the Defence Forces. Strengthen the nation by inspiring pride and leading excellence. I want you to chew on that one for a minute. I'm going to come back and finish with it at the end. So look, I have about 10 minutes. I'm going to touch on 3 points only: the importance of innovation in defence, the importance of external collaboration. Can I step away? Thank you. And the importance of innovating in areas that are outside your core business. So I'll start on the first one, the importance of innovation in defence. Look, our innovation ecosystem in defence is actually two-pronged. It's mutually supporting approaches. We have the external ecosystem, which is up and out, and the internal ecosystem, in and down. And I'll touch briefly on both. I'll start with up and out. The up-and-out ecosystem we have for innovation in defence is very much based on a very strong partnership with our colleagues in the Department of Defence. And the real step change that we made here was by the establishment of a permanent, full-time, dedicated research, technology and innovation unit in defence back in 2020. And that's led by my colleague Philip Mudge from the Department of Defence and Commandant Damien Griffin from the Defence Forces. And they have a civil military team dedicated, and they've done magnificent work since we let them at it full-time and let them off. And I'm going to talk to you about some concrete examples on that when I talk about collaboration. So that's our up and out piece. The in and down, or the internal ecosystem, it's got an awful lot of strands to it. I'm just going to touch on 3, and here's the first one. We have a Chief of Staff Innovation Award program since 2018. And how it works is anybody in the organisation, from a private to a general, can make a submission on an innovative idea. And those ideas are judged annually by a panel of Defence Forces and external experts. We have a formal award-winning award ceremony like you see here. And the best of these ideas are then put forward and proposed to DEPR as part of the annual DEPR Innovation Awards for funding. And I'm glad to say we've had some successes from that quarter in recent years. So that's the first strand. The second one I'll talk about is a program called Defence Sparks. And this is in the CPD area of innovation. So this is about training mindset and skills for innovation. And we take a group of leaders from the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces, we put them together, we get them off-site, in our case recently at the Guinness Enterprise Centre, and we start the programme giving them the mindset and the skills they need to innovate in CivMil teams. We had the first one some weeks ago, and that will culminate in a pitch for funding in December, and we'll see how that goes. The initial soundings are very good. The third programme, which is related to Defence Sparks, is called Defence Innovate. And that's a funding programme we have, which is designed to fund good ideas that come internally from Defence, either through the Defence Sparks programme or stuff that just comes from left field, from some genius out on the front line, gets a good idea, and they can pitch for funding of up to initially 15,000. So that's a sample of the in and down innovation ecosystem we've got. The second point I said I'd speak about was the importance of external collaboration. Now look, it's a cliche, but I'll use it anyway. Innovation is a team sport. It has to be by definition. So we've been collaborating for a century, really. And obviously, a lot of it is in our core business. And we have very strong national collaborations, for example, with our national security partners and with Anne Marie and her team, our oldest partners, in fact, on Garda Síochána, 100 years old. National academic institutions, University of Galway, for example, over 50 years, our partnership with them. Other militaries with the UK on military medicine, with the Scandinavian countries on peacekeeping, international organisations, as you'd expect, the UN, the EU, OSCE, but a wide range of NGOs at home and abroad, and increasingly, in recent decades, increasingly we're partnering with civil society actors. And the most recent strategic partnership we've just set up is with the Glencree Reconciliation Centre. So that's all going, and a huge amount of our innovation, especially on training development, is tied up in that space. But in recent years, and especially since we set up the RTI unit, we're increasingly focused also on another strand, on the so-called triple helix. And this is, if you like, the symbiosis between academia, between the private sector or industry, and between the public sector, also, and other elements in the public sector. And one of the great examples we have of this symbiosis is a partnership we have with Science Foundation Ireland. Fantastic work being done. So the SFI and the and the RTI unit working together. And I'm going to give you a few small examples of what I'm talking about. With Murchú University, for example, we have the Copilot AI, which uses AI to make the dropping of water from our helicopters for firefighting more efficient, more time on target, more tons of water dropped, etc. Echem Sense, we're working with UCD on detecting pathogens in food to avoid food poisoning, which is a particular threat to us when in places like Chad, etc. With TCD and Tyndall Institute here in Cork, magnificent programme using drones where we put VHF repeaters on drones and we create VHF repeater stations over difficult terrain, very good in Ireland, really good in Africa. I'll touch on the last one with Murchú University again, Smart Hangar, which is using AI, sensor technology and robotics to improve the safety of moving aircraft and vehicles in hangars. Now you might think that's, okay, it's useful. Actually, that is critically important operationally. If we get a call at 4 in the morning for a neonatal transfer, which is very urgent, we need to know we can get that aircraft out of the hangar safely, on time, on target, and get going on that mission. You've noticed I've skipped over the University of Galway, and that's because I have a short video on that. And I've always wanted to say, could you roll it there, Colette? I found out actually that the guy running the AV is called Colin. So could you roll it there, Colin, please?
I'm a former chief instructor in the Ordnance School, so my role here is to work hand in hand with the research and development team in designing an end-user innovative solution. So if we have a capability gap testing and identification of a suspicious biological agent, what we're doing here today is we are running the rest of the project team of what we would use to train our own CBRN EOD operators. We call these scenarios a 1,000-piece jigsaw. So in this environment, which is rapidly evolving and dynamic, that we have tools, techniques and procedures we can use in a simplistic and rapid way that gives us the answers that we require.
We are funded by a Science Foundation Ireland and Defence, and DOD really, to develop a project for multi-biological organism detection on site in situ for the first responder units. Now, the current project is really about working with the Defence Forces Ireland, but the implications are way beyond the defence as well as going to go into the civilian applications, environmental applications as well. And what we really believe in is three really important things. One is collaboration, second is synergy, and third is the end-user perspective, to produce an Irish innovation to a problem that is still a major issue for global challenge in treating biological threat agents.
We are here with BioSense, one of the 5 accelerated research programs funded under the Science Foundation Ireland Defence Forces Innovation Challenge. The 5 project teams are developing specific capability deficiencies within defence. Each team has an embedded Defence Forces subject matter experts. The Research Technology and Innovation Unit has continued to support the teams during this seed phase. The SFI Defence Org Innovation Challenge is creating networking opportunities within defence that will benefit the organisation long after the challenge is finished. It enables us to continue to develop an innovation ecosystem and to break down some of the barriers to innovation. We see this as a new beginning for innovation within defence, and we have some very exciting internal innovation and innovation mindset programs currently in development.
Thanks very much. The last point I'm going to make is about the importance of, we're going again, Colin, are we? It was really good. You can watch it a second time, yeah. The last point I'll make is about the importance of innovating outside your core business or your core competence. And the best example I can give you, and it's relevant to our previous session, is the work that we are doing in defence in relation to sustainability, energy and climate action. Now you might ask, why the hell would the Defence Forces be particularly focused on this area? I'll give you 3 reasons. Number 1, because as Mark explained earlier, we've got targets to meet, like all the public sector bodies, 7% year on year, 51% by 2030, etc. The second reason is because it saves us money. And for example, in the Defence Forces, we've had a decrease in use of utilities of 11% in the last year. And of course, that was very helpful now as we try and balance the book, because the cost of utilities has gone through the ceiling. But the third reason, and the most important reason of all, is because it's the right thing to do. Morally, ethically, and going back to the points that Mark and Maurice made earlier, if the public sector is to lead the way on climate action, the Defence Forces should be in the vanguard, because that's what we're for, to defend, to protect and to support the citizens of Ireland. So that said, I'll bring you to my last slide, and I refer you again to the yellow box. If all of us in the public sector are to strengthen the nation, inspire pride and lead excellence, then we must all innovate up and out, in and down. We must all collaborate with partnerships in academia, in the private sector, and other elements of the public sector. And we must all get comfortable and get busy innovating outside our areas of core competence. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Major General Adrian Murchú, and I might come back to you on that concept of, as you say, letting them off to innovate. We might talk about that later in the leadership point. So our next speaker is Deputy Commissioner Anne Marie McMahon. And Anne Marie is responsible for policing and security of the state and have 36 years experience in policing. And also in the past, in 2020, was given responsibility for strategy, governance and performance and implementation of a policing service for our future. So the core reform programme for policing. And that reform programme also brings in the overall leverage of data within the policing service. So over to you, Anne Marie.
Thanks indeed. Okay. Oh, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here with you in City Hall, Cork, for this very important conference. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll talk you through some of the innovations that we've come up with and delivered and executed over the last number of years. So I suppose from a starting standpoint, the most important thing, I suppose, in any innovation is, having a good, solid vision. Where do we want to get to? And that's set out clearly for us by the Commission for the Future of Policing in Ireland report. So that was our starting point. So in the context then of innovation, principle number 8 of the 10 principles in the Commission report was information-led policing. So I suppose that was our starting point. And when the report was published, we were in a reasonable state, but we had so much more work to do. We still do, but we've made good progress in the intervening time. And I suppose the key point about innovation, that it's not just about data, it's not just about technology, and it's not just about processes. It's all about putting them into practice. The execution piece is key. And that brings me on then to our data and technology vision, and that brings to life that 8th principle that I just referred to, and is really, I suppose, the Bible through which we're progressing from an innovative perspective. So, unlocking digital information. So this is, I suppose, really in simple terms, is where we combine the world of electronics and the physical world. And our physical world is a 24/7 policing service. It is, I suppose, complex. It's about trying to combine tradecraft, policing tradecraft. It's about trying to combine our common sense, our empathy, our human rights-based approach, and combining all of those with technology so that we can deliver better for the citizens of this country, ultimately trying to achieve our mission of keeping people safe. So, how do we go about this? So from the outset, I suppose the difference we want to make is in terms of the service to the public. And the means through which we do that, in our case, is through the men and women of Garda Síochána. So there was extensive collaboration with all our guards and Garda staff at various levels, not for every project, but as the role and function fitted. So everything from, you'll see on the slide there, now I know it's a little bit busy, but there's a burglary scenario, and it really is just the complete value chain from start to finish in terms of all the various inputs. And then as we move along the investigative process, the data really comes into its own, in fact, starts to lead it as we progress. So, and you know, when we started off on this journey, our first app took over 12 months to build and to mobilize. But then as we've got better, a lot of that has got much more agile and much swifter. So much so that when we launch apps now, we don't actually provide training, which we did do at the outset. Instead, the guards are using chat rooms. They're talking to each other. They're generating that conversation, which is really what I suppose innovation is all about, really, is just engaging everybody and fostering that sort of a culture. And when I talk about leadership, yes, the leadership at the top is important, but there's leadership at every level. And I think it's when we recognize that, that we'll really, I suppose, see the fruits of our labours coming to fruition. So just some practical examples then of where we've come from and where we've moved to or are moving to. So the first example there is our investigative management system. And you'll see from the slide deck there, heretofore, this was very much a manual process where we had what we call a jobs book. So where we wrote out all of the various investigative strands line by line. And then huge numbers of lever arch folders of statements, files, and so forth. Now, there's still some physical statements, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the actual jobs book, that's all electronic now. But, and I suppose displacing the paper is one thing, and just, I suppose, in terms of the climate, that has its benefits as well. But for us, probably the most important piece is that we're working through a specific spec. So that ensures consistency in our approach in terms of the investigative strategies we deploy. The next one there is our electronic content management system. So supporting the investigative management system, we have a fairly sophisticated file management system. And so that now has become the file management system for the organization. So it's, I suppose, an example of innovation leading to innovation in a manner of speaking. And don't get me wrong now, we're not there yet in terms of all of these, but we're incrementally rolling them out across the organization. And both of these would have started prior to COVID. However, we had to somewhat pivot and focus on other things during the COVID period, as many of you in your room have had to do. And the third point here is our fixed charge penalty notices. And this is the first one that we developed. And the turnaround time in terms of processing these has moved from 4 weeks to a couple of days. And since its introduction in 2020, there are over 330,000 notices issued. Again, this is something that has been embraced and developed in the first instance and very much embraced by operational personnel right around the country. The next one I just want to briefly allude to, and many of you will have had the same experience in terms of how we communicate. And certainly COVID, I suppose, really increased the speed with which we went about video conferencing. Prior to that, it really wasn't done in the organisation at all. So now it's commonplace, both at all the various levels. Team meetings are taking place, not all of them, but a blend is now in vogue. And, you know, referencing back to the previous discussion on climate, you know, reducing that carbon footprint is all part of that as well. Maybe not the overriding intention at the outset, but certainly it's a key part when we actually reflect on it. Our CAD 2 is going to be rolled out in Q1 2023, so that will take us from essentially a caller dispatch system to a full customer relationship management system. And then our resource management. So heretofore, and still the case in many areas across the country, we're working off paper in terms a paper-based system in terms of deploying our resources and so forth. So our rosters and duty management system is incrementally being rolled out, and within that as well, there's evidence of innovation as a result of innovation. When we started on this journey in 2018. We had to install specific kiosks for the Garda members to log on. Now, I suppose, as our information and technology vision has evolved, that we have an app now developed, and that is what the members are using to log on. So again, you know, lots of things going on there. And I'm just conscious of time now, but so how do we share that? So from a leadership perspective, what are we doing to bring people with us? So everything we've delivered and developed has been user-led. The technology and the experts in the IT space come in around that, and we trial it, we evaluate it, and then we roll it out incrementally, invariably. And we also have a series of, I suppose, conversations really in relation to each piece of technology that we've rolled out. And the focus is not necessarily on the technology. The focus is very much on how it can make the Guards' job easier, how it can help us in our mission to keep people safe, how we can deliver a service. And if it's not meeting those kind of things, well then, you know, we have to have a good hard look at it really, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So, and in fact, in terms of those conversations, I just did one on Friday last in relation to 3 specific areas. And again, it's just getting that tangible experience and feedback from the people on the ground. And that's what sells it then to others. It's not that there is I suppose you could say that's our change management process when it comes to technology, getting the men and women who are using this at an operational level, and then let them telling the story and let them reinforce the importance, or not, as the case may be. And if it's a negative, or if there is something to be learned, well then we'll go back to the drawing board and have a fresh look at it. I'm going to conclude at that, and I suppose, as has been alluded to, we're 100 years old this year, and from our starting point, you know, we certainly have come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but 100 years on, I think we're in a good place in terms of planning for the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Anne Marie McMahon. Can I just say on Slido, please do put your questions on Slido, and also anyone prepare your questions and get your hand up. I'll do my best to see you somewhere in the audience when you come to the Q&A. So our last speaker is Dr. Colm Henry, Chief Clinical Officer in the HSE since 2018, National Clinical Advisor and Group Lead for Acute Hospitals before that, and National Lead for Clinical Directors Programme. And I think originally Clinical Lead for the Mercy Hospital here in Cork. So you're kind of welcome home, aren't you? But the last thing I'd say, Colm led the clinical response under COVID-19, but also clinical oversight for the vaccine programme. So over to you, Colm.
Thanks, Frank. And it is a relief to be talking somewhere where I don't have to get a train at 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's good to be. I'm not quite home. It's home for my children. I wasn't lucky enough to be born in Cork, as I'm frequently reminded, but I do live here. Some years ago on the train, pre-pandemic, I was on the train home from Dublin, and the train stalled, and I was sitting next to a person. It was clear that was going to stall for a while, and as happens in those circumstances, we started talking. And he asked me, he said, who do you work for? And I said, well, I work opposite Euston Station. He said, is that the big yellow building? I said, yes. He said, is that the HSE? I said, yes. And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, who do you work for? And he said, Irish Water. So there was a time when we weren't a byword for innovation or popularity, and people wouldn't have either trust or confidence how we might react. And then came a pandemic, and I don't think it's changed everything forever, but it might change our perception of ourselves and how others perceive us. I'm just thinking how which button is it? It's, oh no, got it. Okay. So looking back at the pandemic, extraordinary figures. Nearly 50,000 people hospitalised, 2,700 or more people admitted to intensive care units. Sadly, almost 8,000 deaths. An astonishing over 1.5 million people testing positive. And that's just the story of one country. And looking at our pandemic, if you look at the slide on the top, that reflects those who are testing positive. And at the beginning, to remind you, we didn't have a test for this. The first case was a schoolboy in Dublin. The test took 5 days to turn around in London while he waited in hospital. And then we developed a testing capacity, one of the many innovations we were forced to, by sheer necessity, which peaked at 180,000 tests per week for one single illness. The bottom graph shows the hospitalizations, and you can see the successive impact on a very limited and constrained hospital system over each surge. That beginning in March, April, May, when we were watching Wuhan and Milan in horror, and then our own hospitalizations. We managed just to swerve the curve there. And then the second surge at the bottom graph, you can see that the winter and that long lockdown post-Christmas in 2020 and into 2021, lots of hospitalizations, providing intensive care outside of traditional settings, redeployed staff, upscaling of testing, so the graph on the top is higher because we were testing more people. And then that most recent Omicron, when it was a huge surge in testing capacity, it swept through the nation again because people's immunity from previous variants didn't work as well. And the more bumpy ride on the graph below, because the Omicron thankfully didn't seem to have the same impact in terms of severity of illness, but also with a highly vaccinated population. And of course, there's the public health restrictions. The left is a picture of Grafton Street before the pandemic, or somewhere off Grafton Street, not unusual. And the right is a picture I took on Stephen's Green at 3 o'clock one Friday afternoon on the way back from the Department of Health. Empty, desolate city centre, lifeless but for wildlife. There weren't people who were begging were gone off the street, homeless were gone off the street. They were completely abandoned, and it was like that for months. And looking at then the vaccine response, what was our response in the HSE? Well, firstly, what allowed us to escape from the vice of the pandemic was undoubtedly the vaccine. Before that, the only measures we had against it were those horrendous public health restrictions, the so-called flattening the curve, trying to control the wave of disease through Irish society so that it wouldn't overwhelm our limited healthcare system. And we were no different from other countries in that regard. And also trying to protect vulnerable people with a simple mission: protect vulnerable people, vulnerable situations, protect the health services, and protect other crucial services such as education. But the response in this country was overwhelming. This hall that you're in now became a vaccination hall where tens of thousands of vaccinations were given out. And the end product of that was we saw a level of vaccination of our population that became the envy of Europe. And that wasn't down to the leadership of any one individual. It was down to an astonishing and overwhelming response by the Irish public in embracing the vaccine, and in healthcare professionals in administering the vaccine, including those who came back from retirement and those who volunteered, as I said, in halls such as this. At one stage we had 36 vaccination centres, as well as mobile administration of vaccines Innovation at speed. Speed trumps perfection, we were told by Mike Ryan, and we obeyed that, I hope, and more. And the outcome was an uptake of vaccination approaching 100% for those 65 years of older based on 2011 census figures. And even the overall adult uptake was over 95%. And while we go into the booster phase, the vaccination uptake isn't as sharp, because we can never relive those times again when there was unprecedented fear. And of course, the vaccine pass, which might have been the incentive for younger people to take the vaccine. The public health restrictions were draconian, there's no doubt about that. And they were introduced here early. There was a very simple public health message with it. And it was stay safe, stay at distance, flatten the curve. It was an agile, changing public health message in response to circumstances. And then it was get vaccinated. And the other response we had, it wasn't just vaccination, we had to increase our hospital capacity. We had to increase where healthcare could be given. We were trying to avoid footfall in hospitals, because hospitals became hazardous places. There were outbreaks of COVID within hospitals. 3 hospitals were brought to their knees and almost closed in Letterkenny, Naas and Limerick. We also developed a test and tracing capacity. I mentioned that already. The vaccination programme, our ICU capacity, our core was far too low at 255 beds. We had to provide additional healthcare up to 350 beds with redeployed staff, newly trained, additional healthcare staff, infection prevention control measures, support nursing homes, and introduce hubs of care out in the community that people could present to with respiratory problems. All this was a product of innovation, but it was a product also of necessity, and also telemedicine. Video conferencing or video consultation became a quarter of all consultation during the pandemic. It's now slipped back to 16%, but doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals had to respond at speed because there was no choice. The indirect impact of it was enormous. Big drop in GP consultation. Cancer registrations dropped by 15–20% in 2020. They didn't disappear. They're going to come later and upgrade it. And we're already beginning to see the after effects in terms of eating disorders up 2- or 3-fold during the pandemic. Isolation, malnutrition among older people, delayed cancer presentations with upgrading. And this is the hangover effect from pandemic countries are facing right across the world. Healthcare systems weren't prepared for this. Healthcare systems across the world, including our own, didn't have a surge capacity and struggled to get the equipment, workforce, PPE, and struggled, especially in congregated settings where there are older, vulnerable people. Lessons learned certainly move towards integrated care, broadening where healthcare can be delivered and who delivers healthcare, and not relying on funneling everything through to a consultant in a hospital. It just doesn't work. And maybe reviewing the way we incentivise caring for older people in congregated settings. First and foremost, public health reform is surely, we've learned one thing is if not everyone is safe, everyone is safe, then surely it's the same applies to the health of a nation. That we learned, if we didn't know already, that you must address the needs of the marginalised, those who can't seek vaccination for themselves, those who couldn't protect themselves, without whom we can't move together as a society, and we can't create a healthier whole. And as part of our response, we doubled our public health workforce. We've now created consultants in public health for the first time, and I expect them not to work just in health protection, but also in working how they can improve our overall health, how they can innovate in healthcare design and produce systems of care for cardiology that don't rely on an additional cardiac catheter lab, but may involve addressing healthy eating for children in schools. Big lessons: improved population health, innovation, care delivery, and data. Data was everything. We were found wanting multiple times, especially during vaccination. We couldn't find lists of people with particular illness that needed that vaccination, and we had to rely on pen and paper and chart checking in hospital settings. And the lack of an integrated care record for people really caught us on the hop. Some countries have this. And the lack even of a universal healthcare identifier caught us out. And surely if there's one thing we would like to move towards is a system such as they have in Copenhagen, where somebody rings one number 112 when they need emergency care, and immediately the person who receives their call can see their records, the last time they interacted with healthcare services, their medications, and directs them towards where they go. We did an exercise here in Cork City. I know Anne Doherty is here some years ago, and we found that there were more healthcare records in Cork than there was a population in Cork, and that's because of the system of dispersing out healthcare through multiple hospitals. It doesn't work. It's bad for patients, and it's very uneconomic in view of healthcare delivery. So looking at the challenges ahead, now that we're back into kind of normal business. The pandemic hasn't quite gone away. We're going to see probably further surges, but not as severe, with a better protected population. Chronic disease, access to healthcare, fragmentation of care, and people expecting the best care wherever they present. And those social determinants of health have not gone away either. What makes people sick in the first place? What we do is we fish people out of the river. We treat them in hospitals, we ferry them back and throw them back in the river. And that's what healthcare, we shouldn't flatter ourselves as to the limits of what healthcare systems can do. We should all have developed a better interest in what underlies poor health, what needs to be done. Our workforce, exhausted, fatigued, we have to address their issues, their recruitment, retention, their training, and also their enablement in new models of care. Finally, this is a slide from the Mercy Hospital some years ago. The River League came to meet the hospital in 2009 one morning, and people wanted to help. Staff who were on long-term sick leave appeared from nowhere to be brought in by boat to the hospital to help. Members of the religious order, who I thought were dead, appeared at the front door in order to help as well. Everybody wanted to help. There was an enormous feeling of everybody trying to help the hospital, to help patients, ferry them out. Everybody was together. People who were difficult were no longer difficult. And then 2 weeks after, we were brought, myself and Pat Madden, the then CEO, were brought into the consultant board, who thanked Pat Madden for all his efforts, and then said to him, and now normal conflict resumes. Does normal conflict resume now? I hope not. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Colm Henry. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll come to a few questions. I've got a few, and there's a few coming up on Slido. I think I'll go to you, Adrian, first. You mentioned a number of things. I think the Defence Forces, obviously, taking risk and innovation could be a challenge in an organisation like that. Risk is not easy to take in some situations, for sure. And I think you mentioned the innovation mindset programme as well. Can you talk a little bit, there's some interest, I think, in that in Slido as well, but can you talk a bit from a leader's perspective of how you sort of cultivate that mindset and yet how you balance that risk with the need to innovate?
Well, funnily enough, we have a manual for this. We've got a manual for everything in the Defence Forces. I pulled mine off my desk before I left. That's the Defence Forces Leadership Doctrine. And it's the paper that the manual that we use for all our training in the military college and on exercises, etc. And the area of risk acceptance actually is a particular thing that's covered in this, plus innovation. I'll come back to that. And if you're in my line of work, and I think very much in Anne Marie's line of work as well, there are certain areas where we are very risk averse. Health and safety is one. When we're using lethal weapons, training with lethal weapons, we don't accept really very little risk on that. If you're providing ceremonial for the President of Portugal, as we did in the last week, we don't accept risk on that. We've got to get it right first time, every time, 100%. Now, the problem for an organisation like us is, if we're like that and we're dealing with lethal risk and all that, and we're quite risk averse, we need a change in mindset for innovation that's not lethally dangerous. And that actually is covered in our leadership doctrine, and we're just about to publish the latest version of that, where we've strengthened the language on the importance of innovation as a leadership component, as a very strong factor in leadership doctrine and in good leadership. And the Defence Force I joined 40 years ago, we weren't big on innovation. So if we had a private soldier who got a good idea, he was encouraged to keep it to himself. Now we're gone the complete opposite way, and rightly so. A private soldier can now submit to our innovation awards, and they can, and they do, and they have received awards from the Chief of Staff for a good innovation. And if it's a good enough idea that actually needs funding, we'll put it into deeper, and we've got money for that kind of thing. So that's a change of mindset. Now, one thing I will say is, you've got to let people off. There's a trust people piece in this, which is kind of counterintuitive for soldiers in a hierarchy. You know, it's all command and control. Actually, it's command and control when we're parachuting, we're using lethal weapons, we're diving, because safety comes first, and we've got to do it right first time, every time, nobody gets hurt. However, if we're innovating, we've got to have that other side of our brain engaged, where we say it's okay to take risk, it's okay to fail, once the failure is nothing to do with negligence, laziness, or bad faith. If it's done in line with our values, we learn from the failure, we'll get on with it. And I'll give you an example. The climate targets that we spoke to you about, we got all our combat engineers together who were also responsible for our infrastructure and our utilities management, because they're chartered engineers as well as combat engineers. And we threw the problem on their desk a few years ago and we said, climate action, get busy, come back to us with a plan. They blew our heads away. They ran amok on sustainability. And that's why today we are piloting a wind generation project in Finner Camp, which we hope to roll out nationwide if it works. We are building solar arrays, PV arrays all over the place on all our new buildings. We're retrofitting our old buildings. We're starting work soon on our new first ground-based array on one of our sites. We're piloting a system for battery storage of solar PV power, and we'll roll that out when that works. We're planting trees down in Kilworth in a pilot as well in relation to carbon sinks. We're doing all sorts of mad stuff. Why? Because we got a bunch of people together and we said, get busy. And we allowed them to do that. And that's why, for example, apart from all the other stuff that Maurice and Mark briefed, like the fitting of heat pumps and all the other stuff that we should be doing from the good advice we're getting from other departments, from academia, from OPW, etc. We're doing all that as well. That's why, for example, in the last year, we've had an 11% improvement in our utilities. So I suppose the message for us is, and it's for the old people like me in the organisation, we have to change our mindsets as well in our leadership. We still must get the ceremonial for the President of Portugal right every time. We must get weapons safety and aviation safety, for example, right every time. But we can allow people to get busy, like the RTI unit, which is an excellent example, like the Engineer Corps, which is an excellent example of them being let off and given a bit of head, and off you go, and they really did a good job on it.
Thank you, Adrian. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, but and if anyone in the audience has questions, please do put your hand up and we will find you with a microphone. But maybe I come to Anne Marie. One of the things that you focused on, you kind of majored on, was the idea of execution, right? So being creative and having great ideas is one thing, but driving that through to execution and to the front line, I guess. But that requires a certain level of buy-in and adoption of new technology, and often that can be a challenge. That doesn't always come automatically. What have you learned from those various projects? I mean, I think you're obviously speeding things up now in terms of the apps. What have you learned in terms of that adoption and how to get people on board and utilising the solutions?
Probably the most important thing really in terms of adoption is getting buy-in from the users. So having the user involved from day one to your actual rollout day, and taking the feedback at every step of the way, because I suppose the users are those that will be out at 2 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when there's very little else around or nobody to call on. So they know what it's like, they know what's required. So the feedback and taking that feedback is really important. And I think it has an unintended consequence as well in terms of empowering people and letting them show leadership. You know, I spoke during my short presentation in terms of leadership at every level, but really the end users are leaders in their own right because they're providing the feedback. So if there was one thing I would say, I think that's it, really, just really engaging with the end user and you know, and having the governance and have all the support structures developed around it. But if it doesn't work for the end user, if it doesn't make a difference to his or her job, if it doesn't make a difference in terms of how we interact or how we provide our service to the community, well, then there's no point.
Yeah.
Thank
you, Anne Marie. So coming to Colm with it, if there's nothing from the audience. Colm.
Sorry.
Oh,
I have a question, just a very quick one, sorry.
Thank you.
This is Jerry Brett from the Central Statistics Office. I'm the Staff Engagement and Innovation Officer. And I just have one question for Major General Adrian and Murchú. I suppose we're very jealous of what you have achieved. It's really very impressive in terms of the innovation front. I just wonder, do you think this will actually help the recruitment drive, because that people would see a career in the army as, I suppose, much more developmental because of this dimension to the role? I suppose I'm just throwing that out there. But
I sure as hell hope so. We've been very lucky. We've been innovating on training and development and training and education in the Defence Forces forever. And I'll just quote a compliment we got at you're probably familiar with the Public Service Leadership Board, with the Chief of Staff, the Secretary Generals, the Garda Commissioner, etc., meet through organised by DEPR, obviously. And the discussion was made about, about training and education, lifelong learning, CPD in the public sector. And the Secretary General of the Department of Education said, if you want to look at an exemplar for lifelong learning and adult learning, you should have a look at the Defence Forces. And that was a great compliment from someone outside. We've put enormous work into this for 50 years. And one of the reasons is because a lot of people come into the Defence Forces without 500 points in the Leaving Cert. I was certainly one of them. And yet, from people going back to do their Leaving Cert through the Defence Forces, all the way up through the NQAI 10 level, like our NCOs now do level 5, level 6, etc. Our officers do up to level 9, and some of them are doing level 10. So that's a key piece that we always had. Sorry, I don't know where you are, so I'm just speaking into the void. But I firmly believe that if we can, with that, and accentuate that piece, the lifelong learning and qualification piece that we already have, to go with the innovation piece, and also the people to know that if you come in as a private and if you have a good idea, we will listen to you, we'll encourage you if we need to, and it's a good enough idea, and if it gets through the filters of DEPR, etc., we'll fund you. That's a great message for a young soldier, sailor, or air crew coming in to say, you know, this is an organisation that values innovation. And there are times in the Defence Forces when you have to stand still and be quiet. But for innovation, we want the reverse. We want you to move, and we want you to speak up. And that speaks to our value of moral courage and integrity. You have the moral courage to call it out when it's wrong, and the integrity to do something about it. So I hope that answers your question. My answer is absolutely yes. We hope so.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for the question. Apologies, I just didn't quite see the hand up. Maybe finally I'll come to you, Colm. I suppose there are many, many lessons you had up there, many lessons across the COVID scenario in particular, and things like the IHI being in place and electronic health records and all of that, dear to my heart in terms of the use of technology, obviously. But the health service is nearly always challenged and always in some sort of crisis. But where's the next opportunity, do you think, having learned what has happened now during COVID, where's the next opportunity for innovation in our Irish health service?
I think if there's one, there's so many possible ones. I mentioned the enablers to that, because the enabler is one number per citizen and one electronic chart per citizen that can be carried anywhere they go. That's what we'd like to get to. But the area of innovation we're most interested in has to be now in broadening where access to healthcare is. In other words, that we're not funneling everybody through emergency departments. We don't. Most care takes place in the community, but we still funnel too many people, particularly those with chronic illness, those who are getting on in years. We funnel them through emergency departments or through a traditional setting of going through to a consultant. And where we've seen the greatest innovation pre-pandemic and the greatest acceleration post-pandemic is where we've seen this change. For example, over 200,000 patients have now been seen with low back pain by what we call MSK physiotherapists instead of consultants. We see during the pandemic, we saw hubs of care that were closed out within the community where people didn't have to go through hospitals. We've seen proposals that were escalated at speed to provide diagnostic scanning to GPs in the community to avoid referral to hospitals. So in that broad theme is how can we enable and support healthcare in the community, in line with what Sláinte Care says, by reducing healthcare to the lowest level of complexity it needs. And under that banner, there's an awful lot of space.
Yeah. It's a broad canvas. Thank you, Colm. So, guys, I think we're just about on time. If we don't have any final questions from the audience. Oh, sorry, we do at the back. Sorry.
Hi.
Yep.
This is a question for Major General Adrian Murchú. My name is Denise. I work here in Cork City Council, and everything you've said about innovation really sings to my innovation heart and my innovation style. And I'm wondering if you'd like to collaborate on a Army-style boot camp on innovation mindset programs and collaborate with other public services and get us going in a way, if that's something you would think about, or if you'd like to accept the challenge, maybe we could collaborate.
Well, I tell you, I won't accept the challenge, but I've already name-checked our leads for research, technology, innovation, Philip Mudge and Commandant Damon Griffin, who are in the room there, and you hit them up. I'm not going to micromanage it. They'll come back to me.
I think they're down the back there.
In the spirit of giving them their head, if you can make the case and you can convince them, I'm all for it. Thanks very much, Denise.
So, thank you. That's innovation in action, I think. Can I ask you to show your appreciation for Major General Adrian Murchú, Deputy Commissioner Anne Marie McMahon, and Dr. Colm Henry.